Hey everyone! I just realized something. This here's going to be my video number 100. Who would have thought? But here we are, and that got me thinking that maybe we'd just go and do something, well, maybe not special, but a little bit different from what I otherwise had in mind. Just to sort of mark this little milestone. But also it's something that I need to do anyway, and I've been kind of neglecting it. So since I do regularly get all kinds of questions about pretty much all the vehicles I have here on the lot and what's up with them, I figured I would just go ahead and go over every one of them and give you a little status update and a little bit of the history and maybe some of the future plans if there are any. And also we'll try and fire them up and just take them for a short little drive down here. Now granted, not all of them are running. Some of them just need a few bits to get going, so we'll fire some of those up, while others need, well, a lot of bits to get going, so they won't be running today. I do try to keep most of my vehicles in a state where they are running and driving, at least well enough that they can move themselves around, because that just makes everything much easier. And also, it allows me to fire them up once in a while and take them for a short little drive down here, just to keep things oiled and keep fresh fuel in them and, well, keep them alive, basically. But that's what I mean when I say I have been neglecting that a bit, because some of my vehicles have been parked for quite a while. But I think it's about time we wake them up. But let's just go ahead and start with the ones that are road registered, because they should be fairly easy to fire up and drive. So first up is my daily driver, the 2020 Suzuki Jimny. This is by far the newest vehicle I've ever had, and also the only one that I've ever bought brand new, which means that all the damage on this one is purely my own doing. I suppose it would be kind of embarrassing if this one doesn't start. So this new generation of the Jimny was launched just at a time where I happened to be looking for a new daily driver. Now at the time I was driving my Hummer H3 and, well, that's a different topic really, but that thing gets a lot of hate for no good reason. It was a good truck, but because I live in Denmark and with the amount of driving I do, it was just a bit costly to keep daily driving a Hummer. And I've had it for 6 years and kind of felt like maybe it was time to try something different. And these things were just launched at that time, and on the launch day I was out trying or test driving one of these things and I just fell for it right away. I know the other Jimny owners are gonna agree, these things are really easy to fall in love with. And also, before the Hummer, I had a little Suzuki Samurai and I was kind of missing that as well, so this one just came at the right time and I just had to have it. The Jimny does appear on the channel once in a while, but so far the things I've been doing with it have been pretty simple stuff, like practical things such as the roof rack and the lighting, or just comfort things like the sound system. There are some more things I would like to do. It would be really cool to put a lift kit on this and maybe put a winch in the front and stuff like that. But because it is my daily driver, I don't really have much of a need for that. I just kind of want it because it would be cool. But then again, I do take it off-road once in a while. Speaking of that, let's go into this hole right here. So of course, with this being the daily driver, it didn't strictly need a little drive right now, but it just felt wrong not to include it. But I will just say, when I do take this thing off-road, it really does like to scrape this front bumper out here. And also, I'm often scraping those plastic rocker panels, so maybe we should look a little bit more into that lift kit. We'll see. Next up, we have my 1989 M1038 Humvee. This here has been a dream of mine for so many years. Ever since I was old enough to know what these things were, I have wanted to have a Humvee. But because of the price of these and because of where I live, it was really difficult. But a couple of years ago, things just aligned and it looked like it might be possible. So I just went all in and I finally got one of these things, and I'm just really happy that I did. I do enjoy this thing. I can just look at it. Personally, I think this is one of the coolest vehicles ever made. Now, the people who know anything about Humvees know that this is not the best one I could have got. This is a very basic truck. This one has the old 6.2 liter naturally aspirated. It has the 3-speed transmission and nothing in the back, so it is a very basic Humvee. But to be completely honest, this is exactly what I wanted, because these were the trucks I saw when I was a kid. These were the ones I would come across when I was looking these up time and again, so this was the dream all along. But there are a few other reasons as well as to why I ended up with this exact model, and part of it is what made this possible in the first place. Because it is such a basic version of it, it also means it is on the cheaper end of Humvees. And of course, Humvees can run up to ridiculous prices. There's really no justifying the cost of these things when you just look at what they are. And this one was also expensive, but not as expensive as they can be. And also, because of where I live, it had to be one of these older models if I wanted to get this road registered. Because as the vehicles get newer, they have to meet more and more strict safety requirements and technical requirements, and these trucks just simply cannot meet the requirements that we have here. So it really only is possible to register the very old ones. Or it may still be possible to do it with the newer ones, but it's going to be a massive headache. This one was a big headache in itself already. Anyway, let's take this one for a drive. This has also become sort of my work truck, really, because it's actually fairly practical with that big open bed. And also, it's the only one that can legally tow my trailer with a full load. But it does tend to make people laugh a little bit, because these are already very rare around here, and some of the people that do have them, they tend to keep them a bit locked away. But personally, I think half the fun is using these things. I think I'm just going to take them all through the same 2 holes. That way you can also see the differences a little bit better. I just can't help but have a big smile on my face when I drive this thing. I really do like it the way that it is, but there are a few things that I would like to add to this. One of them is the winch. Because this is an M1038, it really was supposed to be a winch truck, and it does still have the big winch plate out here in the front, but the winch itself is missing, and it has been since before I got it. I don't really have any need for it to be the original hydraulic winch. I could do just fine with a nice electrical winch in there. Another thing is, I would really like to have the hard doors on this, or the so-called X doors, because first of all, I think it just looks really cool. And also these soft doors, they do flapper around a bit when you drive along. But for some reason, those hard doors are just ridiculously expensive. Well, honestly, everything for these trucks is just too expensive for what it is. But that's just the way it is. So this is probably going to be one of those vehicles that I'm just going to be slowly adding to over time. So we'll see. Now we'll go right from one side of the Cold War to the other. This here is my 1981 UAZ 469. And it's actually the second one of these that I got, because the first one I got just did not have the right paperwork to ever become road legal here in the country. I do still have it, we'll go over that in a moment, but I ended up getting this one because I did still want one that I could register and drive around. And it's a bit ironic that I say that, because I really haven't driven this a whole lot lately. It's been parked right here for several months now. You do have to manually prime the carburetor when they haven't been running for a while. Has a little pump down here. And plenty of oil. All right, let's see if this thing will fire up. As if I just shut it off yesterday. I do think these things are pretty funny to drive around in, partly because they are just hilariously bad cars, but also they are extremely good off-road vehicles straight from the factory, and they're probably the most underrated ones, or maybe just the most unknown ones, because these are easily on par with things like the old Jeeps or the old Land Rovers or even the old Mercedes G-Wagons. This will easily keep up with those. At least when you're going off-road. In pretty much all other areas, it won't. But they are very manual vehicles to drive around in. It can be a bit of a workout to drive these off-road, because you have no power steering, well, you have no power anything. Nothing is adjustable, everything is very manual with levers and linkages. You don't even have synchronized gears in all of the gears. It does have some synchro meshes in there, but they don't really seem to do anything, so you're better off just double clutching every time. And yes, I'm aware these holes are pretty easy to go through. I haven't really started digging out my off-road track yet. Besides, this was not really meant to be a big off-road demonstration. We can do that some other time. But let's just see if this thing will go through the other way. It really does make it look easy. I know it wasn't too impressive on camera, it never really is, but I know the Jimny would not have gone through like that. At least not without some serious damage. I'm not even sure the Humvee would. And I have actually been thinking, maybe we should do a video where we compare this against the Humvee, sort of pit them against each other, because I think it would be interesting to see, as these were sort of each other's counterparts throughout the Cold War. So I think it would be kind of interesting to see who actually ended up with the better off-road vehicle. But as mentioned, I don't really drive this thing a whole lot anymore. It seems that whenever I'm going out for events or old-timer meets and stuff like that, I tend to just take the Humvee. And if I want to play around down here with an UAZ, I'm just going to be using the other one over there, because I can be much harder on that one, and it's also a little bit more capable. So yeah, I have been thinking maybe I should just put this one up for sale, but I don't really know yet. And with that, let's just go straight to the other UAZ. This is also a 469 from 1981. And this was the first one that I got. And this is the one where I realized that it just did not have the right paperwork to ever become road legal. Well, maybe it could have been done, but it was in such a poor state that it just didn't really make sense to spend the time and money trying to do that. So eventually we figured, well, if it was never going to go on the road anyway, we may as well focus it on the off-road aspect. So we just started building this up and modifying it as cheaply as we possibly could. So there's a lot of homemade stuff and cheaply built modifications, and actually it all turned out really well. This thing is super capable. I'm not going to go into details in this video. I do have other videos on this and I'm just going to link them in the description. Actually, I'll do that for all the vehicles, so if there's any one of them you want a little bit more information on, just find them down in the description. I'll put up some links for videos where I go a little bit more into detail. But let's fire this thing up and take it for a spin. So for how little this thing has cost me to buy and to build out like this, it's really quite ridiculous what it will do. It's just going to keep going until it rolls over. So I know these obstacles we've taken the last few vehicles through, it's just going to be way too easy for this. So I'm just going to mix it up a little bit. Man, this thing is just a blast to drive. It's also a bit of a workout, but man, it just goes. For how small and simple this thing is, it is just wild what it will go through. I mean, we could of course have built this much bigger and much more elaborate, but by the time we were building this out, we were trying to keep it in a specific class for off-road competitions. So that's why it has this sort of modified stock form. Now, this thing has been living a pretty hard life, even before I got it, but I certainly haven't made it any better. But this has also proven to be one of the most unreliable vehicles that I have. It just seems there's always something wrong with this. And it's not just because of the way I drive it. Like just now, while it's been sitting, the brakes have stopped working. And also that engine in there, it just never really seems to know whether it wants to run or not on that given day. we are actually planning to take this thing out to an upcoming Motor Fest event. It's not really a competition or anything, it's just some show entertainment kind of driving, but I don't really know if we're gonna make it because I'm gonna have to look into some of those issues first. So that brings us to the inside of the workshop, where we of course find the little Unimog 421, or at least half of it. The other half is in the next room, but I'm not going to show you that because I've already filmed most of the video of what I'm doing in there, so you are going to be seeing that pretty soon. However, we can still play around with this for a little bit because it's still wired up in a way that we should be able to start this up, and I haven't heard this running in a good while, so let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so just preheating the glow plugs for a little bit, and I got my remote start here. So, with a little bit of throttle, that's really nice to hear. Alright, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about this thing because, well, most of you already know there is a whole series of videos of this forever ongoing project where I'm saying pretty much all there is to say about it. But if you haven't seen that and you want to, I'm going to leave a link for that playlist down in the description. And that brings us to the other vehicle that is inside the workshop, the old Ford F-250. There's been several people asking about this truck because it's been in the background of so many videos. And the short story is, a colleague of mine knew the guy who had this. He drove it into a tree, damaging the front, and he wasn't really bothered to do anything about that. So he just left it at the back of his barn for a couple of years. Then my colleague went and got a hold of it, and he got it fired back up and brought it to his place where it sat for another few years. And eventually he asked me if I wanted it, so we got it brought out to my place, and it's just been sitting here for several years. So, what's the deal with this? Why don't I just get it done? Several people have asked me about that, like they see there is no progress on this thing, and well, there isn't. And the reason is simply that there's just no hurry. This thing is a little bit too new. So, around here, it is extremely expensive to have one of these big vehicles road registered. But if the vehicle is 35 years old, you can register it as a classic vehicle, or we call it a veteran registration, and some call it a old-timer registration. It's basically the same thing. It means that you can have these vehicles registered for just occasional recreational use. And that's exactly what this would be. And it just makes it a whole lot cheaper to have something like this, like several $1,000s a year cheaper. But this one is from 1990, or maybe it's 91 actually. I don't quite remember. It's right around there, which means that it is getting very close to that 35-year-old mark. So I do think it is about time that I finish this thing up. And to be honest, it is kind of dumb that it's sitting here unfinished because there's really not a whole lot left to do. I have already done most of the work. All I really have left to do is finish up what I have going on with this bed back here. And I gotta build a couple of bumpers for it and of course get it painted in one color, but it really is small things that's left. Everything underneath is done, all the rust is done. It is very close to being finished. Now this has been sitting in here for a really long time, but actually I'm soon going to need this whole room for the little Unimog. So I do need to get this thing out of here. So let's go ahead and get all this stuff out of the way and get it down from those jack stands, and we'll see if we can get this thing fired up. I don't think I've had this started for 2 years or something like that. I cannot see anything out of these windows. So here goes all of that rare and expensive barn find dust. I should probably just wash this thing now that I'm bringing it outside anyway. So I do remember that the key inside the car only turns the ignition on. You can't start it from in there. So that coworker of mine who had it before me, he hooked up a little start button out here. All right, I got the ignition on in there, so let's just give it a go and see what it does. Well, it is cranking, so that's at least something. But to be honest, I don't really know how much diesel is in this, if there's anything at all. Right, let's just go ahead and try it again, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of this just to try and help it out. That's all it took. I'm not going to try to do off-roading stuff with this one like I did with the others. Not because it won't do it, but just because it's only like half put together. So I don't really want to bend and break things and have stuff falling off. But it is really nice to drive this again. And it might just be a good thing because it makes me think I should probably finish this one up. Well, now that it's out here in the sunlight, it's even more obvious that this thing just desperately needs a good wash. But to be fair, most of them do. But it has been an unusually wet spring around here. I mean, we do get a lot of rain, but it's been raining for the past 5 months or something. So everything has just been muddy for a really long time. So to be honest, it's only just now that it starts to make sense to try and wash these things. Anyway, there is another reason that this truck just never seems to get finished, and that's because it's one of those vehicles that I just don't really have much of a plan for. It was just a beat old truck that sort of came into my possession. I wasn't exactly looking for one of these. Well, I make that sound like it was given to me. It was not. I did have to pay for it, and I just couldn't turn it down when I was offered because I really do like this specific body style of the old Fords. It may seem a bit trivial to the Americans, but these are actually pretty rare around here. But I do think it was a good thing that I got this out now and drove it around for a little bit because now I really want to see this finished. I know I'm not going to get around to it right now, but I want to get to it. And that brings us to the vehicles down here in the backyard. And first up is my beloved 1975 Unimog 416. And I know I say beloved and it might not look like it, and I admit I have been neglecting this poor thing a little bit. But it should still run and drive just fine. Only thing is, I took the batteries for something else, so I'm just going to throw a set in there and we should be able to take this one for a drive. So while I was just getting some batteries out and also grabbing a bite to eat, the weather just turned completely. It was so nice a moment ago. Now everything is just wet. Again. Anyway, let's carry on. And by the way, I think the last video that I did on this truck was the one where we tore the tire off this front wheel. Now, at the time, it really didn't seem like I'd done any damage to it, so it was just popped back in place. But it kept losing air after that, so something must have happened to it. Now, I haven't really looked into it any further. I just put the spare wheel on here to keep this thing mobile, but it's not really much of a concern because it needs new tires all around anyway. honestly, this is a bit funny. Unimogs are fantastic machines and they are excellent off-roaders, but if there is one thing that they are not great at, it's mud. And I think there's some curse over my Unimog, because it seems every single time I start this up to go and play around, we get this kind of weather and everything just turns to mud. But I mean, it is trying. Oh, here we go. Come on, buddy, you got this. See, it doesn't even need me to drive it. You go, buddy. Well, it took care of that all on its own, so let's go ahead and find another hole, see if we can get partially stuck in that as well. I really do enjoy driving this thing. I actually like the way they handle, or maybe just the way they carry themselves. They just slowly power through just about anything. And also this particular one, it is a bit special to me because this was my first real off-road vehicle. I mean, I did have a Toyota Hilux before this, but they're not exactly purpose-built off-roaders like this one is. So I guess you could say that with something like this, I kind of started out at the deep end of the pool. And this is really what got the whole thing rolling and got me into off-roading in the first place. There really is something about this vehicle and the rain, because now that I shut it off, the skies are clearing up and the sun is coming back. It just had to be muddy for this. And they really do struggle a bit in the mud. These vehicles are simply just too heavy and slow moving to really be good mud racers. I mean, they will typically do it. They might just find another way. It takes an awful lot to get these stuck, but it just might not seem as elegant as you may come to expect from a Unimog. Some of you might be wondering, if I really adore this particular vehicle so much, why is it in such a state? And it really is a bit of a long story at this point, but it basically comes down to that this thing needs an awful lot of work. It has a lot of issues. It needs engine work, it needs axle work, electrical work, body work, and so on. There's a ton of little things I have to fix up on this. And I just really don't want to be doing a half job of all this stuff. So at the moment, I would rather just keep it all together and keep it running until I have room in the workshop so we can bring this inside and really fix it back up. And that brings us to the vehicles that are not running and driving. And first up, we have the other Unimog 421. This one is from 1973. And I got this one shortly after I got the green one that is inside the workshop. Now, this was not really something I was planning on getting, but it was just one of those things that was simply too cheap for me to leave it behind. There is already a short little video series where we get this fired up and get it going. It took a little bit of doing, but we got there. And really, it should still be running and driving. However, I have been stealing a few parts off of this one to finish the other one that I have going on. Next up, we have the UAZ 452, or as it's more commonly known, the Bukhanka. This thing I only got to drive twice. Once was when we were out to pick it up, and the other time it was down here in my yard. Now, I will say the engine in this was in a terrible state. Really, the whole vehicle is. It has not been serviced or cared for many years. But as I was driving it around down here, it suddenly started to run low on oil pressure, so it was just parked here and we yanked the engine out to get it fixed. And at that point it got a little bit weird because as we were fixing the engine from this one, I was driving around in that, and that one suddenly ran out of oil pressure. And we figured because the Bukhanka had a Volga engine, they are slightly more powerful, and that one still had the original engine, which is a little bit weaker. And I would rather have the original engine in the Bukhanka and the powerful engine in that one. So we took the original engine out of that and put the Bukhanka engine in there, or the Volga engine as it were, which means that the engine I'm left with is sitting on the floor inside the workshop, and it has been ever since. So this thing has been parked for a pretty long time without an engine. But the whole vehicle really needs a ton of work, both on the inside and on the outside, and also for the engine and the whole drivetrain. So I don't really know what the plan is. I would like to fix it up, but I don't really know exactly when that is going to happen. And next up we have the good old Ford 555. This is not inoperable. It works perfectly fine. It just happens to be parked among these guys. But let's go ahead and fire this thing up, because I actually want to get these two frame rails out of the way. They're not supposed to be just laying out here in the grass. Now, this machine really is one of the better investments that I've made, because it has made so many things so much easier. Something as simple as just picking up and moving those frame rails. Without a heavy lifter like this, I really would not have any good way of doing that, but now it's just a piece of cake. I will say that a backhoe was not really what I had in mind when I was looking for machinery, but this thing showed up and it was in budget and easy to get it here, so I went for it, and I gotta say that now that I have it, I seem to use it for just about everything. And the next little project that I have in mind for this thing is to replace that windshield up there, because I am getting a little bit tired of looking through that star pattern. So I'm trying to see if I can find an original windshield for one of these. Otherwise, I will have to come up with something else. And that brings us to the last vehicle back here, the 1969 Unimog 404. And this is the one that's had a diesel swapped in it. But if you've seen the last video, you would know that that diesel is unfortunately not really worth anything. Now, this vehicle has been many different people's project truck, but somehow it's just been getting worse and worse over the years, and it was almost scrapped, but it ended up here at my place, and it turns out that this particular vehicle actually has a little bit of a special history from its military life, so there may just be something completely different happening with this one, but I'm gonna give you a video update on that as soon as I know more. And that's really it for all of the vehicles back here. But wait, there's more. Alright guys, so I've been filming this video over a few different days, and right in between all of that, me and my buddy went on a little trip and I ended up getting another vehicle. Now I'm not going to show you any more than this because I think it deserves its own introduction, but I just wanted to include it because we're going over all of my current vehicles. I am a little bit curious though, can any of you tell what this is just from what you see here? Let me know your best guess down in the comments. Otherwise, you're just going to have to stay tuned to see what this is. And as for another hint on that new vehicle, the camera is currently mounted on top of it. And with that, we really have gone over all of the vehicles that I currently have here on the lot. Now, I was trying to keep things short, so if you have any questions or comments, just leave them below. I do read all of them. And this really concludes the video number 100. So I really just want to give a big thanks to all of you guys for watching along and just for being such a good crowd in general. It really makes it a lot more enjoyable to do these kinds of videos. So I'll be seeing you in the next one.